Hello. Today is the feast of St. Cyprian of Carthage and of St. Cornelius, who was the Bishop of Rome in the middle of the 3rd century. They both met their end in a time of persecution. Not quite sure what happened to Pope Cornelius. Certainly he was exiled and that he died in exile. He may have died from being put to hard labour. He may have been beheaded. We don't quite know that yet. But St. Cyprian was certainly martyred under the Emperor Valerian. They're both operating in a time of great persecution. Around about 250 AD, you have the Emperor Decius, who puts forward a persecution. In order to avoid persecution, you had to sacrifice to the pagan gods and get yourself what's called a libellus, a little book to say that you had been faithful to the emperor. And if you didn't, then you were summarily given a rather hard time, shall we say. Of course, persecution makes things very difficult. Some Christians stay strong and become martyrs. Other Christians go into hiding. Others lapse. And there are people who gave away their holy books for burning. There are those who received a libellus in order to avoid persecution. And after that persecution passes, well, what happens? What do you do when you've lapsed? Can you come back to the church? And this brings us to an interesting problem. It's a problem of extremes. Some very liberal folks said, yes, you can come straight back into the church, no problem. And others said, no, there's no way of coming back into the church. So you've got an extreme there. The extremist was most notably headed by a chap called Novatian, and he is set up as an anti-pope to Pope Cornelius, and is known for the rigorous non-admittance of Christians into the church. Those who'd fallen back into the church. No, he says, you can't do that. Once you've fallen away, that's it. St. Cyprian, as in the case, I think, of any Catholic doctrine, looks for the middle path, the middle between the two extremes, between Novatian's hardline approach and the rather liberal, just let him back in, no problem. And he says, well, look, this is a famous phrase of his, outside of the church, there can't be any salvation, because salvation is Jesus Christ. That's who it is. So, as it says in St. Mark's Gospel, the person who believes and is baptized shall be saved, and those who do not believe will not be saved. So Cyprian is quite hardline. He says there are no sacraments outside the church because you've cut yourself off from God, who is the giver of grace. But he says, once you've come back in, once you've plugged yourself back in, you should be able to do it. But plugging yourself back in should not be an easy affair. You should expect to do some form of penance. And, well, we regard that as essentially saying that one has to recognise that one has sinned by falling away from God. And just like the prodigal son, going back to his father, he goes back just hoping for some sort of basic comforts, but just home and food. That's all the prodigal son wants, and he goes back expecting to be treated as slave, and he has that expectation, and it just so happens that the father instead runs out to meet him and catches him up and has the great feast. And so St. Cyprian says, well, look, you've got to get yourself into the mindset whereby you cannot presume upon the God's charity, liberality like that. You have to come in repentant. You have to demonstrate to yourself, as much as well as anyone else, that you have fallen and that you need repentance. You need the mercy of God. And so some form of penance is necessary for that to happen. But he says once that's happened, you can be fully admitted back into communion. And yes, admittedly, there were some very strict rules about people. If you read some of the canons of the church, the early church, people would have to, sinners would have to prostrate for so many years, then be admitted, and then only after a certain another number of years would they be allowed to receive communion again. These things were sort of waived if you happened to be at death's door. So St. Cyprian toes this line between not allowing people to come back in without some form of penance, but allowing people back in. He's also one of the first people to explicitly write down the doctrine of baptismal regeneration, that baptism does something. It washes away sins, it renews, and it gives the second birth. And he's expressing what the rest of the fathers of the church were saying, but he expresses it particularly clearly. So we have a lot to thank St. Cyprian for, and as I say, St. Cornelius himself, again, opposing the extremes and the rather unpleasant extreme that people could be regarded as being irredeemable. As a Benedictine, of course, I hear the words, "You shall not despair of the mercy of God." You can't do that. So, what does this mean for the church? Well, now that we're thinking of the church as being directed by doctrine, that we're all travelling a path towards Christ, we have to make sure that we are on that path. We have to be directed. And that's the whole business of doctrine. It's the whole reason of the creeds and for the whole teaching ministry of the church. But in moving forward, we are encouraging people. We're getting a flow going, if you like, sort of like a current in a river. The river of water has a current. The living water has a current flowing out from God, flowing back to God. And we have to be part of that current. And if we swim against the current, as Novation did, by a lack of compassion for the fallenness of human beings, then it takes us away from the direction which we're going. And St. Cyprian is right. Outside of the church, and what do we mean by the church? Well, the church is that body of people who have Christ as their head, who are, i.e., the people who are directed towards him in this flow of living water, in this directedness of the church. That is the church, and there can't be any grace apart from God. because that defeat that's an illogical statement. Because grace, what is grace? Grace is the active presence of God for the person who receives it. Grace is a gift, and therefore we have to do something with it. Because it's a gift, we have a choice what to do with it. So St. Cyprian is an important saint in the Church. He is mentioned in the Gregorian canon as in a list of people who we understand to be an exemplar, a doctor of the Church. And it's well worth reading his work on the unity of the Church and on the lapsed, because they give us some idea of how the Church is united, and it is united for the sake of those who fall. It's for the salvation of the fallen, not for their condemnation. And as Christians, that's what we must do too. Our job is not for condemning. It is for convincing people, drawing people into the living water and into that tide that draws us to Christ. We have to say, come in, the water's lovely. So God bless you. God bless you if you are affected by extremism from other Christians. God bless you that you may see the loving mercy of God for you and his plan for your salvation if you want to receive it in him. God bless you that your appreciation of God may stick to the middle ground and stay away from extremes which can destroy love in us, so that you may know that love, that warmth of love that comes from following Christ. And God bless you that as we move forward together to Christ, we may receive his salvation in him. God bless you, and please pray for me.